Yeah, I don't know. I mean, all my work is kind of this samey.
Would you boil me?
I'm from Buffalo, and then moved here for school, New York City, Brooklyn. I live here and work here. So I went to a couple of different schools before I went to SVA. In high school, you figure out you're gonna do art school or whatever, and I applied to a bunch, and then you realize that you're poor and you can't afford any of them. So then I went to like a shitty state school in Buffalo, and was there for a year and hated it, and like exclusively hung out with like the pot dealers so I could get free drugs. After that, I went to another different shitty state school called Fraternal that's out in the sticks, and went there for a semester, and then like worked up a portfolio instead of going to any of my classes, and sort of flunked out of that school but got accepted to SVA and like was able to get like a scholarship, and then went to SVA, and I wanted to go there because they had a cartooning program, and in a more fanboy kind of way, David Mazzucchelli teaches there, and that dude's comics was what made me want to make comics. In high school, I was kind of a delinquent. Like I just hung out with the skateboarders and like would like sneak out of school to go like smoke cigarettes behind the fire hall or whatever. But in my like senior year, I decided that I was like I think I had a moment where I was like sitting and reading a comic book in one of my teacher's classes, and I was like, yeah, I'll just make comics. And like then for the rest of my senior year, just exclusively took the art classes and would hang out in the room. But it was all, yeah, I would say it's formal. It's not that self, only in the sense that like you have to keep doing it to be any good at it. I don't remember my first comic because I've just always had comics. Like I remember getting my first Calvin and Hobbes book from my Uncle Jack at my first communion, and then like always read the Sunday strips, but there was never like a comic book store in Buffalo. And so my grandmother would go to these flea markets and like garage sales, and she would buy me single issue like DC comics and Marvel comics and shit, and she would like bring them to me. Like she would like in like stacks, like okay, like here's 10, and then when I see you next month I'll bring you another 10. And I still remember the first one she gave me was like Teen Titans Spotlight featuring Nightwing, which is weird too because like that book is like all about Nightwing or like Robin going back to the Batcave for the first time since he left. And like I feel like most of my comics are all about like that sort of identity crisis that like people have when they like sort of step out of like the shadow of their parents or something. Yeah, totally. Well, it's like a weird thing where it's like comics is it's so obvious, but it's so weird too, like how you make them. Like, I feel like almost everyone made comics when they were a kid. Like you draw a couple of pictures on a page and like make a little story up. But it's like weird things where it doesn't really click until someone tells you that they sort of like, that you can do it, and then like, oh, here's how you do it. I think it was the same thing with like being a part of like a music scene when you're a kid, where it's like, especially when you grow up in like a place like Buffalo where it's sort of like empty and there's nothing really going on. It's like, one of those like Rust Belt cities. Finding a sort of group of people who are interested in the same thing as you, and then like show you new shit and like can get you excited about different stuff. Like my one friend Owen Carroll, I met him my freshman year at SVA, and like I was into comics and I didn't really know what I was gonna do with it. And I was like, I guess I'm just gonna work really hard at this, but I don't really know what I'm gonna make. And then I met my friend Owen, and he showed me like Dan Klaus, and he showed me the Hernandez brothers, and he showed me Charles Burns, and like that became all of the shit that I became obsessed with. Like he was the dude who gave me my first Lose comic, and yeah, I kind of owe everything to Owen as far as my comics knowledge. But finding people like that, and then like wanting to impress your friends, like wanting to be like, oh no, like stick around, like I'll be cool, like I'm not gonna fuck up, like, and so you work really hard to like make your friends laugh or think your shit's good. SVA was good and bad. I feel like it's like any art school, right? Like it's like, you know, it's cool because you meet friends and like you really dig your friends that you meet there, and like you get to go, like you come from, especially going from like a really crappy shitty city like Buffalo, and then you move to fucking New York City and meet all these cool kids from like Louisiana and Colorado and Connecticut, and like realize that there's like other people like you out in the world is maybe the most exciting thing about art school. Like it was really great in that like I had some really amazing professors like fucking Gary Panner, and like Klaus Janson was really amazing, and Nick Bertozzi, and obviously Mazzucchelli. Like meeting all of those people and like having them like show you how to make comics is really fucking cool, especially because since they're like, it's such a mixed bag of like people. Like Klaus is like mainstream superheroes, Gary's as weird as you can get, and then Mazzucchelli is like sort of somewhere in the middle. I feel like I might have read it in your Penelope Gazin interview where I feel like you should go to art school for like a year and then drop out and then just keep hanging out with those kids. Like the most like education you get is from the people that you surround yourself with. And then it's like art school is like a really easy way to do that. You've sort of like thrown everyone into the colander, and everyone that came out is like gonna be like you, or at least interesting to you. No, after I graduated, I was fucking terrified. Like, it's the thing where it's like, yeah, I'm gonna make these weird comics and it'll be super fun, but then you're like, oh man, I'm really poor. I mean, I wasn't so worried about like money per se. I was just worried about like not hating what I was doing. So like when I was at school, I worked at Forbidden Planet, which is a comic shop in New York. I worked there the entire time I went to SVA, like 50 hours a week, and then like to like try and pay my way through school. And then, so when I graduated, I still had that job, which I was ready to be done with at that point. And yeah, I was sort of worried what to sort of do with this whole like fucking 4 years of skills that I learned or whatever. And I feel like everyone goes through this right when they graduate, where it's like, I was working really hard trying to like make some comics, or like just like make an illustration portfolio over again and like make something that like I could make marketable so I could do my job. But it was all really shitty and like bad, and like so many false starts and like so many abandoned comics and stuff. And then I got a job sort of serendipitously doing inking on like a mainstream book, and that in conjunction with like Forbidden Planet was enough to like sustain myself, and that sort of like calmed me down a bit, where it's like, okay, like I'm sort of working in my field, which was like, okay, cool, I can tell this to my mom and she'll be happy that like, okay, cool, it wasn't a total waste of money, like you went to art school and now you're gonna work in a comic shop for the rest of your life. But that made it easier to like make, like not give a shit about as much, like in a weird way, like when you don't give a like your work is not so all important, you can make better work. Like when you can just sort of like relax and not worry about if there's going to be a readership, and not worry about if it's good or bad, you can just make it, and then that's helpful, and then that ended up working out, it seems. Funeral Pudding was probably like the culmination of a couple of failed comics, and it I wrote the whole thing in a car with my parents and my partner Courtney when we were on a vacation weekend retreat in where did we go, Court? Maine. And yeah, we were in like the car driving back through Bangor, Maine, and I don't know, we were like up in the woods the whole weekend, and that sort of being with my parents in a car, because like a lot of it is slightly veiled autobiography. Like my family, there is like my mom, my dad, my brother, and me, and like we took a road trip across the country, which is like one part of the story. And then the other part of it, the sort of the fella in the woods, is maybe more about me as far as like that sort of getting out of school identity, or that sort of idea of childhood, the way that it breaks, and the way that you realize the world, the way you exist inside the world, and the way your perception shifts, seeing your parents as people and not as just these omnipotent beings. I had a couple other weird jobs getting out of school where like I was an artist assistant to David Sandlin, who's a printmaker, bookmaker, artist. And I also got a job working at Desert Island with Gabe Fowler. And yeah, I started like making the books and sort of like wasn't really thinking about how I was going to print them, but just sort of like started making funeral pudding and was like had a background in silk screening, and so I sort of understood that like, you know, if I was going to do a limited color, I could do this. And then yeah, just sort of serendipitously was like, oh, I should risograph the thing, because David had been risographing books, and I was like, okay, I'll do that. And then I was talking to Gabe and was like, I can't find what I need to do the book as a risograph. And Gabe was like, oh, talk to this dude. And then I talked to Jesse. So it was a cool thing, just like community thing where it's like people knowing people. Yeah, and then I just like the risograph. I feel like everyone is just heightens everything just enough. Like even if you're just going to do a black and white comic, to print it on a risograph just makes it feel like a better object, like something you would actually want to hold, especially in like the conversation now about like why print anything as opposed to like just throwing it up on the web where it's, you know, infinite. There's a lot of planning. Like the physical object is actually the end goal. Like with I'm working on this new book right now, and the whole thing was sort of designed and worked out before I even sort of finished writing the story. And sort of like, okay, like setting up systems of working where it's like, I'll have, okay, it needs to work inside like obviously like a multiple of 4, and then how do we tell the story inside that multiple of 4 so it's interesting, and then okay, we can work with these colors, what can you do with these colors that'll be interesting, and like, okay, how does that function with the story? And so yeah, everything sort of feeds back into each other. Like I'm always thinking about the product, and then also the way that the final object paces out the story, and then the way that the story relates to that. And that's like being a paper nerd and like a print nerd, like just being into that sort of stuff and wanting to make nice objects, like give people a reason to want to fucking read it, just if anything, like, or like, you know, have it just because it looks nice, even if the content is shit. The writing thing has always been really tricky for me, like, cause like you go to art school and it is all pretty much like, especially at SVA, it's like how to tell a story. And so like most of my interest coming out of school is like not even in drawing so much, it's just like how you tell a story and like the sort of cool visual tricks that comics have that other mediums don't have. And so it's like if you're gonna make a comic, it needs to only function as a comic. And so related to the writing, it was like always kind of a struggle to like work something out that would be interesting. It's like I almost think of it more like songwriting. So like I used to play in like bands and shit in high school a bunch, and like we would write songs and they're all terrible. But like, you know, bands like Y or sort of bands like that where they're almost vaguely telling a story the whole time, and there's these sort of like very specific notes that hit in the way that resonates with people. I find like that's what I'm interested in writing. Like I'm not interested in doing like this big overarching like narrative that has like, you know, I'm not interested in writing like Tolstoy. But I like that's why most of my stuff is shorter, is I like to sort of get more than just a feeling across, but a story with the idea of a feeling or the position in life of like how you feel, and then work in conjunction with like, okay, so if we gotta like with the structure of a song, like they're hitting these notes at these moments to hit like, you know, your heartstrings. So like how do we do that with storytelling in this story? And my process is like way convoluted and weird with it. Illustration I have a weird relationship to. I don't think I'm very good at it, but like, you know, I'm more geared to like multiple images, and it's hard for me to like distill it down into like a concept, at least with like what is like the current marketable trend in illustration. Oh, that sounds horrible if I can say it like that. But yeah, it's, you know, I do a lot of work for Vice. I mean, like, I probably owe most of my career to Nick Gazin, the art editor at Vice. The way I approach it is maybe similar to the way I approach my comics, as far as like when I come up with a story, it's like visually how will this look best, and so it's not like I have a style I rely on. Like there's a way my hand's gonna move, but I don't rely on a specific style. It's sort of what should this be simpler? Should this be more rendered? Should the panels have more background, less background? I sort of do the same thing with my illustration work, and it's like, okay, what is the correct visual solution to this? And so not that it's like I have my style and then I approach the concept, it's more like what is going to be the best way visually and also conceptually to like approach this problem. But that's still a work in progress. I get bored drawing the same way all the time. Like I think it's boring, and like if you've worked out the problem, like why keep doing it? And then also too, like I just get so excited by like seeing different ways of approaching picture making. Like I remember seeing for the first time, he's a good buddy now, but the first time I saw Daniel Zender's work and like losing it because I couldn't believe seeing like that sort of approach to like making a picture, like how simplified it was and yet how effective it was. And then like in contrast to like seeing someone like who's another good friend now, like Jensen Eckwall's work, which is like, you know, this very lush watercolor painted stuff, and it's like wanting to play in everybody's sandbox, like oh, that looks like fucking fun, like I want to do that, like I want to do those soft glows, like I want to do and just like the pleasure of moving your hand and like making an image, just like the sheer joy you can get out of like drawing and then figuring something out. Like right now I'm probably going through a little bit of a Leanne Shapton phase, like trying a little bit more like that, sort of just like no pencils, just loose brush work and really having fun just like making the marks and thinking about drawing. And so yeah, and definitely being young too, like I'm sort of now like calming down about that and like not being so nervous about like having a marketable style. It doesn't sound interesting or fun to do that, and so like why would I want that to be my job, even though that's what they tell you at art school? And so it's like, well, you know, I have jobs now, I can do that, like where I can be in the studio all the time, and that's great. And so I have that luxury of like I can just do whatever I want with my own work and not really worry about what it looks like.
I forgot the reason.
So I got the job at Desert Island because I saw, actually I think it was Courtney Menard, she was like, hey, do you see this? She was friends with Gabe on Facebook, and she was like, do you see that Gabe's looking for help? And like I'd been going to Desert Island for like 3 or 4 years at that point, and like me and Gabe knew each other. I'd drop books off and like would talk and stuff, but we weren't like close or anything. And so I like went in one day and like was like, hey, like are you still looking to hire somebody? And he's like, yeah. And he's like, I think I might have someone, but like, you know, just shoot me an email and like, you know, maybe it'll work out. And like, so I sent him an email like a couple hours later, and like at 4 a.m, I get an email back from him. He's like, hey man, that'd be great, just fill out this thing and you can come work, and I just want to make sure you're cool. And so yeah, I don't know, it's just sort of worked out, and it's been awesome. I feel like, you know, I definitely owe the fact that I have any sort of readership or any sort of like that people are reading the stuff that is just my personal work, be to Gabe and to Nick Gazin. Like Gabe, not that there's so much gatekeepers or anything like that in the comics world. The comics world, at least the indie one, is like pretty accepting and everyone's pretty chill. But like having someone like being behind the counter at Desert Island, like people just automatically assume you're a cool dude because Gabe's a cool dude, and it's like, well, if Gabe likes you, you must be cool. It's like it's almost like he's vouching for you or something. Like no, this guy's cool, guys. He can come into our club. Not that like, yeah, it was like an easier workaround than having to like prove yourself or something. And also too, just like getting to see like all the weird comics and getting to know like, I mean, Gabe's so fucking smart. Like the stuff he knows that. And like the weird stories he can tell you about stuff that you wouldn't otherwise know about, like Le Dernier Cri stuff or all this weird sort of French art book stuff. And to like get that sort of art education while also getting paid for it is cool. I met Nick at MoCA this past year. So yeah, I mean, you mentioned that like I got out of school and I didn't have literally any work. Like I was a cartoonist who had no comics, and so like maybe starting in like October of last year, I think I did the math on this yesterday, like from me, from like this point, it's almost been exactly a year. Like all of the comics that people have seen, I've made in the past year. So I was at Mocha and like had the things out on the table, and Nick just came by and wrote an article that he normally does. I think, what's he call it, Comic Book Love, or Comics Aren't for Kids Anymore. And like very kindly like included me in it, and like bought all my comics and said nice things to me, which was weird because like I knew Nick, like everyone knows Nick Gazin. It's hard to miss with the mustache, although I guess he doesn't have the mustache anymore. It was really cool to get it from Nick too, because Nick is an honest critic. Like some people give him shit and say that he's like mean or something, but in such a cuddling community, like the only criticism I have is maybe that comics criticism isn't harsh enough. And Nick is someone who's very real about it, which is, so to get that from him felt very validating. And yeah, he like sort of immediately hit me up after that to start doing illustrations for Vice, which I did. And then like, once again, I was doing a comic for Smoke Signal that I was really hyped on, which Gabe let me do. You know, I wanted to post it on the internet or whatever so people could read it, but there's like, you know, Gabe wants people to wait a little bit before they do that, so I just like was like, well, I want to share some fucking comic, so I drew this stupid little one-pager and posted that and put it on Instagram, and Nick hit me on Instagram and I was like, hey, do you want to do comics for Vice? And then I started doing comics for Vice. So yeah, it's weird, like that's what I mean, like Gabe and Nick just sort of bouncing back and forth, like giving me giving me opportunities to like get my stuff out there to people in like a really easy, like, I mean, Smoke Signal's free and anyone can pick it up, and it's like people do, and so like there's a cool opportunity there. And then Vice, it's like it's just there, it's there forever, people can read it. Yeah, it's like a weird thing. Like I never, like when you're in fucking school for illustration, especially SVA, I don't know if it's like it at the other schools, but they like make you go to like the American Illustration Party, and they make you like go to these like functions and all these shows, and like that's all fine and good, but like at least for me, and I feel like most people as students, like, you know, what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to like walk up to these art directors at these parties and be like, hey, it's really, I love what you do, now please give me money. It's just so weird and like doesn't, like, why would you want to do that? like I get it, like you're trying to make a career, you're trying to do this thing, and some people are really good at it and very natural, and like I think it's maybe the same thing that I do, where it's like it's not a calculated thing. Like I just love what Gabe does, and so like yeah, I want to be a part of that. Like I want to come and like hang out with you, and then it works out too, where he's like, oh, I like what you do, yeah, like let's do this. And so it's more of a natural thing where it's like just find people that like you like or like think are doing a cool thing and like hang out with them, where it's like, you know, like I don't know, like it doesn't even have to be art related. Like me and Gabe are friends outside of that. Like he wants to build a cabin in the woods, and he's like, when I'm doing that, you're gonna come out and we're gonna build it, and like weird shit like that, like where you like, you know, they become actual friends where like you hang out and you do stuff, and it's more community based, and you know, like, you know, I'll build you this birdhouse, and then you can give me the seed, or like some stupid metaphor or something like that. You know, it's and it's more fun that way. Like I don't, they sort of try to tell you that in art school, but it doesn't. Everyone's all like keyed up and like terrified of like failing. That like it doesn't, never naturally works out. I sort of had this idea that was going to be like a 3 or 4 page thing, and it'd been like I'd sent Nick a couple of comics, and sort of was playing with this other one. I was like, hey man, like I know I normally send you 1-pagers, but I'm gonna send you like a 5-pager. I know it's been a minute since I've sent you something, but like that's why it's been a minute. And he was like, okay, cool, do you just want to do it as a serial though? And I was like, oh, I didn't know that was an option. And he was like, yeah, you can do that, man. And I was like, all right, cool, let's do that then. And so we did the serial, and that was weird because like before it went up, I had like a couple pages drawn. Like I had it all planned out, but I only had like, it was like immediately after Nick said, do you want to do it? It like went up like 2 days later as starting. So I didn't have a lot of time. And so it was like a weird thing where, you know, every week I had to draw the page and make sure the page got in, or however many pages, so that like it could function as a standalone thing. And that was maybe the most interesting thing about it, is that I had to shape it more like, okay, this has to be a larger narrative, but also it needs to function within one or a couple of pages as a story on its own, because that's just simply like how it has to function on Vice. Baby Teeth was a weird one. That was like a growing pains comic for me, which is funny too, just because of the subject matter is like growing pains. Yeah, I'm happy to have done that. I was really thankful, Nick, for that opportunity, but I'm also really happy that that comic's done. That comic got weird. There was one weird bit where, like, Nick had sort of told me that he had gotten an email or something from someone that they were calling my comics Michael DeFord Ripoff comics, and that was hard to swallow at first, and it's like, I can kind of see it, like this, okay, yeah, like, and that's part of being young too, is like sort of working through your influences and trying to like, exercise all of that and getting it out. But it was weird to also be doing it in a public arena in which I was being paid to do it, but I like had to keep doing it, like I couldn't just drop off on it. And so like I tried to like imbue it with some jokes, sort of referencing that. Like I drew Creep Highway into one of the fucking pages, and like emailed Patrick about it, and he seemed to think he seemed cool about it, and he didn't seem creeped out or anything. But I don't know, he's a Canadian, maybe he's just polite. Maybe he was super terrified. But yeah, that was a weird comic to do, and I don't know. It seemed like a very polarizing one, where I got responses like from people who loved it and thought it was great, and then other people who were like not so into it, and then people who hated it. And for the most part, up until that point, I mean, especially since I haven't really been out there so long, everything's been so positive and like, here's an award and you're great, and we have a table and do this thing for us. To have something that had such a negative reaction was kind of actually awesome. Like, I was kind of like excited to get like, oh cool, like people are pissed about this, like this is great. It's eliciting some sort of reaction. Yeah, I mean, that's a constant concern. Like every single thing I do, I'm always very conscious of like, because I'm very, like I read a lot of comics and like I'm excited about a lot of things. And so it's like always a worry like that, oh, this looks like too much like somebody else, or like this idea is probably like, implanted in my subconscious because it affected me so much when I was reading this thing, and then is coming out without me remembering that this came from somewhere. But I'm definitely getting more comfortable with my own thing. For a while there, when you get out of school, it's like you're so nervous about, is your voice valid, or is what you're doing going to be good, and like giving yourself the chance to like do something different, that you sort of maybe, you're like, well, that person's doing something that is working, and so maybe you go that route. And that stuff is always the worst shit you're going to do, because it's just so insincere and so not honest. But it's the sort of thing where I feel like you just need to keep working. Like you just need to exercise all that stuff. And like, there's this whole thing right now about, not right now, but it's been for a bit, like the young artist, like the young art star. And like, it's attractive. Who wouldn't want to be that? Who doesn't want to be like the darling of the community or something? But everybody needs to just go at their own pace. Like, I'm probably not going to be somebody who's figured out what they're doing until they're like 50 or something. Like that's how I always feel. Like, I definitely have, I think, in my writing, it's more my own, whereas sometimes the visual style is coming from a couple of different places and it's a little obvious, but it's sort of, you think about like, there's sort of a history of that in cartooning as well. And you look at Tomina and sort of how he caught flack for most of his career about being a Hernandez ripoff or a Dan Klaus ripoff, and it's like, well, Adrian's work is very effective, it's amazing, and I'm sure it bummed him out. I don't know. That would bum me out if he had to like hear that every single time. But you just kept fucking doing the work, and so like, if that's all you know how to do, then that's all you know. That's all you can do. You just keep making the work, and eventually, you work it out. The overall like bones of the story on like a comic, I'm never worried about. Like, and like structurally or like storytelling pacing wise, like this works. Like if there's one thing I'm confident in, I'm like, no, I can at least visually get the story across. The thing there I get like worried though is like the themes or like the dialogue. Like I'm always constantly worried about like dialogue. Like, is this read right? Is this natural? Is this coming off how I want it to? and in that way, I really think about like a readership, about like who's going to be reading it. Like my comic Swimmers, I did. I remember like I did it, and like it ended up going over great, and people seemed to really like it, and I got the Mocha Award thing for it this year, which was really exciting, and really pumped about it, and thought it was okay, cool, this was a great comic. And then like a month later, I was like sort of reading I think it was Sarah Horrocks did a thing about Sam Alden's It Will Never Happen Again story, and she really like cut into it and like sort of like talked about the male view of romance, and like this sort of like way that was really interesting and very problematic. And then I immediately started comparing it to Swimmers, because like I had a couple people be like, yo, women, man, right? And I was like, no, that's not like, dude, no. But you can't help that. Like you can't tell those people no, because that's how they read it, and so you sort of have to always be aware of that. And so that's interesting. It's sort of another problem, and I kind of like that. Like sort of like, okay, like let's not make some shitty like perpetuating some idea comic. So I think about that a lot. Yeah, I mean, I've been sitting on a comic now for months, and would also really like to get back to finishing Funeral Pudding, because it's supposed to be like 10 chapters, and I've only done 3. But just sort of having to take jobs has dictated my amount of time right now to like do money. But it would be great to like maybe get like one really big job that could like pay my rent for a few months, and then I could just work exclusively on pumping out comics, because I want to double how many pages I did in this past year. I think I did like 120, and so I'd like to get that up to like at least 200 pages for this next year. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, all my work is kind of this samey, in that it's a lot about like how do we exist in the world, and especially like focusing in on that like sort of age of when you're sort of realizing that you have to interact in the world, like the just post-adolescence, where it's like, you know, and that sort of feeling, and how that travels through like through your 20s and stuff, and that's probably like, you know, like what artists have like 1 or 2 themes that they always read, like that's probably the one that'll be around until I don't know, maybe when I'm like 40 or something and have like a child. The only thing I'm more interested in is like I'm interested in just making longer stories now. And so like, yeah, continuing to like make bigger stories, or you know, write something that's a lot more than, you know, 12 pages or 1 or 2 pages, and just seeing what happens with that. Like, just because I don't know, like I'm only doing shorter stuff and doing these things, like what would happen if you keep writing this character instead of like, okay, that person's done and they don't exist anymore, and now like let's do a new thing that's basically the same person but in a different situation. Yeah, I'm just more excited to just see what happens, because I never really know. There's not like a plan. Like I don't really, it's kind of nice to be that young and not really know what I am yet. Like have that sort of like, and give yourself that freedom to be like, yeah, no, just like do it, dude. Like what's like the worst that happens is like nobody reads it, and if they, you know, that's fine. Nobody asked me to make comics.